When a man like Paul Weller finally speaks about the music that shaped him, it isn't nostalgia, it's the sound of a lifetime quietly coming into focus. Born in 1958, Paul Weller grew up at a moment when British music was still learning how to speak in its own voice. So when Paul Weller, now 67, finally named the 5 musicians who mattered most to him, it wasn't just a list, it was a lifetime distilled into sound. The first name sits slightly apart from the rest, not because it's more famous, but because it represents a turning point in how Weller learned to listen. John Coltrane. Long before Weller became a symbol of British modernism, before the sharp suits and clipped guitar lines, he encountered a sound that didn't feel like entertainment at all. It felt like revelation. Hearing Coltrane for the first time wasn't about melody or fashion. It was about intensity, purpose, a sense that music could reach beyond pleasure and into something almost sacred. Coltrane wasn't just a jazz musician to Weller. He was a compass. Albums like A Love Supreme didn't simply play, they unfolded. The opening notes felt like a door opening onto a larger room, one where discipline and devotion coexisted. Coltrane's playing carried urgency, but never panic. It was searching, but never lost. That balance struck Weller deeply. In Coltrane, he heard a man pushing his craft to its limits without losing humility, someone who believed that sincerity mattered more than surface brilliance. What Weller respected most was Coltrane's refusal to coast. Even at the height of recognition, Coltrane kept dismantling his own habits, practicing relentlessly, breaking patterns apart, and rebuilding them stronger. That work ethic, the quiet grind behind the transcendence, stayed with Weller. In his own studio sessions years later, the approach echoed. Sketch, refine, strip back, repeat. No shortcuts, no safety nets, just the pursuit of something truer than the last attempt. There was also the spiritual weight of Coltrane's music, something Weller rarely speaks about directly but clearly feels. Coltrane once said he wanted to be a force for real good. That sentence alone explains why Weller returns to him again and again. The music wasn't trying to impress, it was trying to reach upward. On Giant Steps, Coltrane rewrote the language of improvisation. On My Favorite Things, he took something familiar and stretched it until it revealed a new shape. And on A Love Supreme, he turned gratitude into sound, prayer into structure. For Weller, that fusion of mastery and meaning became a North Star. You can hear that lesson throughout Weller's own catalog. The early jam records, sharp and confrontational, still carry a moral center. The Style Council's sole influences weren't decoration, they were declarations of intent. Even in his later solo work, when the pace slows and the arrangements breathe more freely, there's a sense of purpose guiding each choice. Like Coltrane, Weller learned that evolution doesn't mean abandoning your core. It means protecting it as everything else changes. Coltrane also offered Weller a philosophy that would last a lifetime. Strip away the excess and play with honesty. One sincere note, placed correctly, can outweigh 1,000 clever ones. That belief explains why Weller's most enduring songs often feel simple on the surface. They don't announce their complexity, they earn it. And that's why, decades on, Coltrane remains at the top of Weller's inner circle, not as a distant idol, but as a constant presence. A reminder that music, when approached with discipline and humility, can become something permanent, something that stays. If John Coltrane taught Paul Weller how to search, Marvin Gaye taught him how to listen to the world around him. Where Coltrane reached upward, Gaye looked outward into streets, into homes, into the quiet unease of everyday life. Weller has often returned to Marvin Gaye not as a fan revisiting a classic, but as a craftsman studying a manual. The first time What's Going On entered his orbit, it didn't sound like protest music in the traditional sense. It sounded calm, measured, almost tender. And that was the shock. The album proved that urgency didn't need volume, and truth didn't need to shout. Before that record, Marvin Gaye had already been everywhere. His voice had carried romance, heartbreak, and celebration into millions of living rooms. But with What's Going On, he did something braver. He slowed the tempo of conversation and asked listeners to lean in. Weller heard that restraint immediately. Songs could be socially aware without becoming slogans. Arrangements could be complex without losing warmth. A bass line could wander like a second voice, telling its own story alongside the singer. James Jamerson's lines didn't just support the songs, they argued with them, comforted them, questioned them. Weller admired the way Gaye trusted subtlety. On tracks like Mercy, Mercy Me, the subject matter is heavy, environmental decay, spiritual exhaustion, but the touch is light. Strings glide, percussion barely presses. The tension between sound and meaning is what gives the song its power. That contrast stayed with Weller. In his own writing, you can hear the same instinct, letting a gentle groove carry a difficult thought, allowing space to do the work emotion might otherwise force. There was also Marvin Gaye's courage to change. Before 1971, he was Motown's polished voice. Afterward, he became something harder to categorize. Let's Get It On turned intimacy into confession. Here, My Dear laid private wounds bare without apology. Weller respected that refusal to stagnate. Reinvention, in Gaye's case, wasn't branding. It was survival. Marvin once said that if you can't find peace within yourself, you won't find it anywhere else. Weller heard that inner search in the way Gaye layered his own vocals, answering himself, questioning himself, never pretending to be settled. For a listener who came of age with vinyl spinning late into the night, this wasn't abstract. If you remember hearing What's Going On the radio when it first arrived, you remember how different it felt. Weller certainly did. It taught him that music could hold anger, prayer, exhaustion, and hope all at once, and remain graceful. That lesson never left him. The third name on Weller's list brings a different kind of energy, but no less depth. Stevie Wonder. To Weller, Stevie isn't just a songwriter or a virtuoso. He's a builder of worlds. In the 1970s, when Wonder took full creative control of his work, he didn't retreat into complexity for its own sake. He expanded the palette, synthesizers, clavinet, layered harmonies. These weren't novelties. They were tools, shaped to serve feeling rather than overwhelm it. Weller listened closely to how Wonder arranged his songs. On Talking Book and Intervisions, the grooves feel alive, moving with purpose. Bass lines pulse like city traffic. Horns enter and exit like conversations overheard on a street corner. Nothing feels ornamental. Every part earns its place. That discipline mattered to Weller. Innovation, Stevie showed him, works best when it's grounded in humanity. There's a line Stevie Wonder once said that Weller has carried with him. Just because a man lacks the use of his eyes doesn't mean he lacks vision. That philosophy echoes through albums like Songs in the Key of Life. A record Weller treats less like a collection of tracks and more like a map. It's joyful, political, intimate, playful, yet never scattered. Each song expands the world without losing coherence. For Weller, that balance was proof that ambition doesn't have to fracture identity. Musically, Wonder's fearlessness left a mark. The percussive drive of Superstition, the lift of Higher Ground, the narrative weight of Living for the City. All of it demonstrated that rhythm could be muscular and still carry compassion. Weller absorbed that lesson in his own arrangements. Let the band push forward, but let the song speak plainly. Leave space where it matters. Stack harmonies only when they serve the story. What Weller respects most about Stevie Wonder is generosity. Despite the virtuosity, the music never turns inward. It points outward to the listener, to the community, to shared experience. That ethic shaped how Weller approached his own career, especially as time passed. Success didn't mean retreating into self-reference. It meant widening the circle. Together, Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder represent two pillars of Weller's listening life. One taught him empathy and restraint. The other taught him how to innovate without losing warmth. Between them lies a blueprint for making music that lasts not by chasing trends, but by listening carefully to what the moment asks for and answering with honesty. If Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder taught Paul Weller how to balance empathy with invention, the next influence brought him home. The Kinks were not just a band he admired, they were a mirror. Long before Weller found his own voice as a chronicler of British life, Ray Davies was already mapping it in detail. Streets, back gardens, cafes, bus stops, places most people passed without noticing, became the emotional center of songs that lingered far longer than their modest arrangements suggested. For Weller, that was a revelation. Great writing didn't need grand statements. It needed attention. The first time Weller truly connected with the Kinks, it felt less like discovery and more like recognition. Ray Davies wrote about ordinary people without condescension, finding dignity in routines others dismissed as dull. Humor and melancholy sat side by side, never canceling each other out. That balance spoke directly to Weller's instincts. When the Jam were shaping their early identity, this influence wasn't hidden. Covering David Watts on all ModCons wasn't just tribute, it was a quiet declaration of lineage, a way of saying, this is where we come from. What Weller respected most was specificity. Ray Davies understood that the more precise the detail, the wider the reach. A lyric about a single street could feel universal if it was told cleanly enough. Songs like Waterloo Sunset didn't rely on drama. They observed a couple on a bridge, light fading, the city slowing down. The line lands softly as long as I gaze on Waterloo Sunset. I am in paradise, and somehow, a crowded city becomes sanctuary. Weller took that lesson seriously. In his own ballads, emotion often arrives without announcement, carried by detail rather than declaration. Then there's the Village Green Preservation Society, a record Weller has returned to throughout his life. At first glance, it feels modest songs about photo albums, steam trains, fading clubs. But beneath that gentleness is something defiant, a refusal to let memory be flattened by progress. For Weller, the album offered permission. You could honor the local without sounding small. You could be nostalgic without becoming sentimental. That spirit runs quietly through his writing, especially as the years passed. Characters who don't shout but somehow linger. Lives sketched in a few careful lines. The Kinks also showed Weller how gratitude and ache could coexist. Days doesn't pretend everything was fine. It simply acknowledges what was given and what was lost. Thank you for the days, those endless days. That tone, generous, skeptical, warm, became part of Weller's emotional vocabulary. When he aims for grace instead of confrontation, that influence is there, steady and unmistakable. The final name on Weller's list shifts the volume down even further. Nick Drake. When Weller speaks about Drake, his voice changes not with nostalgia, but with respect. Drake's music doesn't demand attention. It asks for silence and then rewards it. 3 albums in 5 years. 5 Leaves Left, Brighter Later, Pink Moon. Each one spare, precise, and quietly devastating. For Weller, discovering Drake wasn't about joining a cult of appreciation. It was about recognizing courage and restraint. Drake wrote like a confidant, finger-picked patterns that felt conversational, melodies that floated but never drifted, lines that sounded simple until they stayed with you for years. Weller listened closely to how little Drake needed to say something lasting. On Riverman, the mood moves like a dream, yet lands with certainty. On Hazy Jane II, brightness and warning share the same space. That balanced candor without spectacle became something Weller chased in his own work. There was also Drake's relationship with the studio. He rarely performed live, uncomfortable with the noise between songs, the glare of attention. The microphone became the safe place. On Brighter Later, Robert Kirby's strings lift the voice gently, never overwhelming it. On Pink Moon, nearly everything is stripped away. Voice, guitar, a single piano note. 2 minutes, and yet it feels enormous. Weller admired that bravery, the willingness to trust the song completely. If you remember hearing Nick Drake for the first time, you remember the stillness it required. Weller did too. Drake's songs weren't slogans. They were postcards from an interior world, sent quietly but received deeply. Even when the themes turned inward, they never felt cold. The closing moments of 5 Leaves Left feel like a hand on the shoulder after a long night. Intimate, but somehow communal. For Weller, Nick Drake proved something essential. Music doesn't need to announce its importance. It can arrive softly and stay permanently. Drake didn't chase acclaim in his lifetime, but the records found their people slowly, then forever. That arc mattered to Weller. Craft, character, and conviction outlast fashion every time. Listening to these 5 names together, you begin to understand that Paul Weller wasn't listing idols, he was naming the quiet architects of his own voice. Each musician offered him a different lesson, but the thread connecting them is unmistakable. Discipline without rigidity, emotion without excess, innovation anchored by purpose. None of these artists chased the moment. They trusted the work and let time do the rest. Coltrane showed him how to search for truth without losing humility. Marvin Gaye taught him that empathy could carry weight without raising its voice. Stevie Wonder proved that ambition and warmth didn't have to compete. The Kinks reminded him that ordinary lives, observed carefully, could become timeless songs. And Nick Drake offered the courage of restraint, the belief that honesty, delivered softly, can travel further than noise. Taken together, they reveal Weller not as a collector of influences, but as a listener who stayed loyal to what endured. Decades on, Paul Weller still plays with that same quiet fire. He once said that the best music doesn't age, it deepens. And perhaps that's the final lesson in his list. These artists didn't simply shape his sound. They shaped how he listens, how he writes, and how he stands in the world. Because the music that truly matters never fades. It waits. It returns. And if you've lived with it long enough, it becomes part of you. Paul Weller's choices define an era where craft outweighed spectacle and sincerity outlasted fashion. His favorites reflect a generation that believed music should mean something, and still does. As long as I'm curious, I'll keep making records. The day that stops, I'll stop too.